Is your life worth more than a single piece of silver? Or are you arrogant enough to gamble your soul against an ancient deity? Because that is exactly what you are doing when you stand at the edge of the Limpopo River and decide that the old rules do not apply to you, that the stories your grandmother told you were just stories, that the ritual your grandfather performed at every crossing was just superstition, that the silver coin that every local guide will press into your hand before you step into that water is just a quaint tradition from a time that does not understand what you understand. When you stand before the churning silt of the Limpopo, will you pay the ritual toll, or will you let the vengeful spirits drag you under? Because they have dragged people under before. People who thought exactly what you are thinking right now. People who are no longer here to tell you what they saw in the water in the last moment before it took them. Tonight we go to the Limpopo, one of the most spiritually charged bodies of water in all of southern Africa. A river that has been demanding its toll from the people who cross it for longer than anyone alive can remember, and that has been collecting on the debt of those who refuse to pay with a consistency that the people who live along its banks do not consider coincidence. Before we go further, subscribe right now, hit the bell, and tell us in the comments, have you ever felt something watching you near water? Drop it below. We want to know. Now, get comfortable. The river is waiting. Chapter 1, the river that remembers everything. There are rivers that are simply rivers, bodies of water that flow from their source to their destination, that fill in the rains and drop in the dry season, that flood their banks occasionally and retreat again, that provide water and fish and irrigation to the communities along them, and ask nothing in return except the basic respect that any powerful natural force commands from the people who live beside it. The Limpopo is not one of these rivers. The Limpopo remembers. It remembers every crossing ever made along its length, every offering ever dropped into its brown water, every prayer ever spoken at its banks, every person who approached it with the right attitude and every person who approached it with the wrong one. It remembers because it is not simply a river. It is a living entity, animated by spiritual forces that the people of southern Africa have been in relationship with for as long as their oral traditions reach back. Forces that are specific names and specific characters and specific expectations of the human beings who enter their domain. And the most fundamental of those expectations, the expectation that has governed every crossing of the Limpopo for generations beyond counting, is the offering of the silver coin. The Limpopo River rises in the Witwatersrand Range of South Africa, near the city that is now Johannesburg, and flows in a great arc, first westward, then northward, then eastward, for approximately 1,750 kilometers before emptying into the Indian Ocean on the coast of Mozambique. Along its length, it forms a border between South Africa and Botswana, and between South Africa and Zimbabwe, and between Zimbabwe and Mozambique, a natural boundary that has shaped the political geography of the region for centuries and that carries, in its role as a border, a specific spiritual significance that goes beyond its function as a line on a map. Borders are liminal spaces, thresholds between one world and another, places where the categories that organize ordinary life become temporarily uncertain, where what is here and what is there, what is known and what is unknown, what is safe and what is dangerous, are briefly suspended in the crossing. And liminal spaces, in the spiritual understanding of the southern African peoples who have lived along the Limpopo for millennia, are the places where the boundary between the human world and the spiritual world is thinnest, where the forces that ordinarily operate invisibly in the background of everyday life become most immediately present and most immediately powerful. The Limpopo is a liminal space in the most complete possible sense, a river that is simultaneously a border, a threshold, a crossing point, and one of the most spiritually significant bodies of water in the region. And the specific ritual of the silver coin offering is the human response to this liminal power, the specific protocol through which a person requests safe passage through a space that does not belong to ordinary human reality. The specific communities whose relationship with the Limpopo is most deeply documented in the oral traditions and the ethnographic literature are the Venda people of the northern Limpopo region, a community whose spiritual traditions have some of the richest and most extensively studied water deity beliefs in southern Africa, and whose specific understanding of the Limpopo's spiritual character is the primary lens through which tonight's story will be told. The Venda understanding of water, of rivers and lakes and pools and the specific spiritual entities that inhabit them, is organized around a concept that has no single English equivalent, but that translates approximately as a living water. The understanding that bodies of water are not inert physical features of the landscape but living entities, animated by spiritual forces that are as real and as capable of affecting human life as any other force in the world. The specific spiritual entity most closely associated with the Limpopo in the Venda tradition is a being whose name and whose specific character vary across different communities and different sub-traditions. The oral traditions of the region are rich and varied, and the specific deity of the Limpopo crossing is described differently in different accounts, but whose essential character is consistent. This is a being of genuine power, not the gentle, beneficent power of a protective ancestor, not the kind of spiritual force that can be approached with confidence and whose good intentions toward human beings can be assumed. This is a power of a force that is genuinely indifferent to human welfare in the absence of the correct approach, genuinely capable of harm when the correct protocols are not followed, genuinely demanding of the respect that power requires. A force that does not distinguish between the person who ignores the offering out of malice and the person who ignores it out of ignorance. A force that collects its toll regardless of the reason it was not paid. The brown color of the Limpopo, the specific, distinctive, opaque brownness of its water that comes from the enormous load of silt that it carries from the erosion of the landscapes it drains, is not simply a physical characteristic in the spiritual understanding of the people who live along it. It is evidence of the river's hidden depth. The silt-laden water conceals what is beneath it completely. Unlike a clear river, where the bottom is visible and the depth can be estimated and the specific hazards of a crossing can be assessed by direct observation, the Limpopo's brown water offers no visibility, no information about what lies beneath the surface, no ability to read the bottom from above. This opacity is spiritually significant. The river keeps its secrets. What moves in the brown water below the surface, the specific fish and the specific currents and the specific underwater features a knowledgeable local navigator learns to read through indirect evidence rather than direct observation, is hidden from the outside observer, visible only to the river itself and to the spiritual forces that animate it, and the crossing of water that conceals its depths, water that could be 2 feet deep or 10 feet deep, that could be moving slowly or with a treacherous underwater current, that could be hiding a submerged rock or a deep hole with a specific underwater geography that makes a crossing that looks simple from the bank into something genuinely dangerous, is an act of trust. Trust in the water. Trust in the specific spiritual intelligence that governs it. Trust that the entity whose domain you are entering will allow you passage rather than exploiting the vulnerability that the opacity of the water creates. The silver coin is a mechanism through which that trust is established. The specific, concrete, physically enacted expression of the recognition that this crossing is not yours to make by right, that the water belongs to a force that is not you, and that passage through it requires acknowledgement of that force's authority and genuine respect for its power. The specific use of silver, rather than gold, rather than copper, rather than any other metal, in the offering is not arbitrary, and understanding why silver is a required material for the Limpopo toll is one of the keys to understanding the deeper logic of the entire practice. Silver, in the spiritual traditions of many southern African peoples, has a specific association with water and with the moon, the celestial body whose gravitational influence on the tides connected to every body of water on Earth, whose monthly cycle of waxing and waning mirrors a seasonal flooding and recession of the rivers, whose reflected light on water at night was one of the most powerful and most mysterious visual experiences available to people living before artificial illumination. The moon's silver light on the brown water of the Limpopo at night is an image of extraordinary spiritual charge, the cold, reflected, otherworldly quality of moonlight on dark water evoking exactly the quality of the liminal, the threshold, the space between worlds that the Limpopo crossing represents. Silver is the moon's metal, and the moon is the water's celestial counterpart. The silver coin dropped into the Limpopo is therefore not simply a payment. It is a resonance, a matching of the offering to the nature of the force being honored. the specific material that speaks the river's own language of silver light and lunar influence and the cold, reflective quality of deep water at night. The river recognizes the silver, not in the way that a merchant recognizes payment, not as a transaction in the commercial sense, but in the way that a force recognizes its own nature being acknowledged, the way that any being responds to the specific expression of understanding its character rather than simply its power. The silver coin says, I know what you are. Not just, I know you are dangerous. I know what you are. And that knowledge, that specific, materially expressed acknowledgement of the river's spiritual nature is what the offering communicates, and what its absence fails to communicate, and what the river's response to its absence is ultimately about. The crossing of the Limpopo without the silver coin offering is not simply a breach of protocol. It is a specific kind of spiritual statement, a declaration, whether intentional or not, that a person crossing does not recognize the authority of the force they are entering the domain of. In the spiritual understanding of the people who live along the Limpopo, this declaration has consequences, not metaphorical consequences, not the psychological consequences of guilt or the social consequences of community disapproval, though both of these are real enough. Actual consequences, the kind that manifest in the physical world, in the specific ways that the river's power expresses itself when the protocols that govern its use are violated. The stories of these consequences are among the most consistently told and most specifically detailed in the oral traditions of the Limpopo communities, accounts of specific people, in specific circumstances, at specific crossing points along the river, who declined or forgot or simply did not know about the silver coin offering and what happened to them in the water. These are the stories that the local guides tell, that the elders recount, that the communities along the river's banks carry in their collective memory as evidence, not of superstition, not of primitive belief, but of the specific, documented, repeatedly confirmed reality of what the Limpopo does to those who do not pay their toll. And it is to these stories that tonight's journey now turns. Let the night settle around you gently, and let the brown water of the Limpopo settle into your imagination, its opacity and its depth and the specific spiritual weight of its crossing, the silver coin that is not simply a coin but a language, the force beneath the surface that is not simply a river but a presence. The stories are coming. The accounts of the people who cross without paying are coming. And the specific, detailed, deeply human record of what the Limpopo does when it is not respected is coming. Let your body find its comfortable weight, and let the river's sound find its way into the quiet of the night. The low, steady, brown water moving over stones, carrying its silt toward the sea, carrying its secrets in the opacity that conceals everything beneath its surface. The river is patient. It has been patient for a very long time, and it is still waiting for the ones who have not yet paid. Chapter 2, The Ones Who Didn't Pay. There is a specific quality to the silence that falls in a community after someone is taken by the Limpopo, not the silence of grief alone. Though grief is present, genuinely and deeply present, in the way that the loss of a specific person in a specific community that knew them is always present. It is the silence of recognition, the particular quiet that settles over people who are not surprised, who are sad, who are shaken, who feel the loss in the specific way that communities feel the loss of their members, but who are not surprised, because the story of what happened follows a pattern that they have heard before, that their parents heard before them, that the oral traditions of their community have been preserving and transmitting precisely because the pattern repeats, because the Limpopo has been following the same logic for as long as anyone can remember. The person did not pay, and the river collected. The accounts of Limpopo crossings gone wrong are not difficult to find along the river's length. They exist in the oral traditions of every community that has lived beside the river for any significant period. They exist in the records of the colonial administrators who documented local beliefs and local incidents with varying degrees of sympathy and understanding. They exist in the accounts of the researchers and the anthropologists who have spent time in the Limpopo communities and who have recorded what the people there told them, What is striking about these accounts? What distinguishes them from the kind of generalized cautionary tales that circulate in any community about any dangerous natural feature is their specificity. They are not vague warnings about the dangers of rivers in general. They are specific accounts of specific people, named, located in specific places along the river, placed in specific historical moments, and what happened to them in the specific context of a crossing that was made without the appropriate offering. The specificity is the evidence, not proof in the scientific sense, not the kind of evidence that can be assessed against a control group or subjected to statistical analysis, but the kind of evidence that communities produce when they are not inventing cautionary fictions, but transmitting the actual memory of actual events, the kind of specificity that is a hallmark of genuine oral historical tradition rather than mythological elaboration. The first category of accounts, the ones that appear most frequently and most consistently across the different communities along the Limpopo's length, are the drowning stories. Not the drowning of swimmers caught in unexpected currents, not the drowning of children who wandered too close to the bank, not the drowning of people whose deaths can be attributed to specific, identifiable physical causes that have nothing to do with spiritual forces. The drowning of people who had crossed the same section of the river many times before, who knew the water, who were experienced in the specific crossing they were making, and who drowned anyway, in conditions that the people who witnessed the crossing or who knew the person and the crossing point found genuinely inexplicable in purely physical terms. A man who had crossed a specific ford in the Limpopo hundreds of times, who knew the specific underwater geography of that ford in the intimate way that regular users of a specific crossing know it, who knew which rocks to step on, and which patches of sand were firm, and which were deceptively soft, crossing on a day when the water was unremarkable, in conditions no different from the conditions of the previous 100 crossings, and simply not coming out the other side. The body found downstream, sometimes not found at all. The community knowing, without needing to investigate further, what had been different about that particular crossing. The absence of the silver coin, the absence of the prayer, the absence of the specific acknowledgement that the four required and that had always been given before. What makes these accounts particularly compelling? What distinguishes them from the kind of retrospective rationalization that psychology would predict when communities try to make sense of accidental deaths? Is the existence of witnesses who describe specific anomalies in the river's behavior at the moment of the drowning, not the ordinary behavior of a dangerous river in flood. Specific anomalies. The water rising suddenly at a specific point in the crossing, not along the whole river, not in the way that flash flooding rises, but at a specific location, around a specific person, as if the water itself was responding to a specific individual rather than simply behaving according to the physics of a river system. The current reversing, moving upstream at a specific point while the rest of the river continued its normal downstream flow, creating a localized hydraulic anomaly that the witnesses could see from the bank and that they describe in terms that are consistent across multiple independent accounts from different communities and different time periods. A sound, described variously as a deep drumming, a low voice, a vibration felt in the chest rather than heard with the ears, emanating from the water at the specific moment and specific location of the crossing gone wrong. These witness accounts are not the accounts of people trying to construct a supernatural explanation for something they do not understand. They are the accounts of people describing specific sensory experiences that they observed directly, reported in a specific, concrete, detail-oriented way that genuine eyewitness testimony tends to be reported with the specific inconsistencies and specific agreements that characterize real observation rather than collaborative fabrication. The second category of Limpopo accounts is in some ways more disturbing than the drowning stories. more disturbing because the people at the center of them survived the crossing, came out the other side, and then experienced the consequences of the unpaid toll in their lives rather than in the water. These are the stories of the ones the river marked, not drowned, not taken immediately, but touched in a specific way that the Limpopo spiritual force touches those who have crossed its threshold without the correct protocol, in ways that manifest in their lives afterward in forms that the communities along the river recognize as the specific signature of an unpaid debt to the water, illness of a specific kind. Not the ordinary illnesses that people along the Limpopo, like people everywhere, contract in the ordinary course of their lives, but a specific kind of wasting illness, characterized by a specific combination of symptoms that the traditional healers of the Limpopo communities have learned to associate with the spiritual condition of having crossed the river without paying. The illness responds to ordinary treatment poorly or not at all. The herbs and the remedies that address ordinary illness are ineffective because the problem is not ordinary. It is a specific spiritual condition that requires a specific spiritual remedy. The specific ritual going back to the river, performing the overdue offering, and asking the spiritual forces of the Limpopo to release the person from the grip of the unpaid debt when this specific remedy is applied. When the person or their family takes them back to the crossing point, performs a silver coin offering with the appropriate prayers and the appropriate acknowledgement of what was done and what was owed, and formally asks the river for forgiveness. The illness often resolves in ways that the community, and in some cases the person themselves, attributes directly to the ritual rather than to any other cause. The specific pattern of illness, unresponsive to ordinary treatment, resolving after the specific river ritual, is one of the most consistent features of the marked accounts, and its consistency across different communities and different time periods is the kind of pattern that is difficult to explain purely through the psychology of expectation and the placebo effect, though these are real and significant forces that any honest analysis needs to take into account. There is a specific account from the Venda oral tradition, recorded by ethnographers working in the region in the mid-20th century and preserved in the academic literature on Venda's spiritual practice, that is worth examining in detail because it illustrates the specific character of the Limpopo's spiritual consequences with a vividness and a specificity that the general descriptions cannot quite convey. The account concerns a young man, a cattle herder from a community on the southern bank of the Limpopo, old enough to cross the river independently, but young enough that the specific protocols of the crossing had not yet been fully internalized, had not yet become the automatic, habitual practice that older community members performed without thinking. He was crossing to retrieve cattle that had wandered to the northern bank during the night. A practical, urgent task, not a ceremonial occasion. Not a moment that he was approaching with the specific mindfulness that the ritual required. He had the coin. It was in his pocket. Placed there by habit rather than by intention, the result of his mother's practice of always ensuring that he carried one when he went near the river. But in the urgency of the crossing, and the focus on the cattle rather than on the ritual, he crossed without dropping the coin, not a deliberate refusal. Not arrogance, not disrespect. Simply the distraction of a young person focused on a practical task, forgetting that the spiritual dimension of the crossing required as much attention as a physical dimension. The account of what happened next varies slightly in their specific details. Oral traditions always vary in their specific details, but they agree on the essential shape of what followed. The crossing itself was uneventful. He reached the northern bank, found the cattle, began driving them back toward the ford, and as he entered the water on the return crossing, the river changed. Not catastrophically, not in the sudden, violent way of the drowning accounts, not with the immediate, lethal force that takes people who make the crossing in deliberate disregard of the protocols. but perceptibly, the water that had been at his knees was suddenly at his waist. The ford that he had crossed hundreds of times, that his feet knew the way a person knows a familiar road in the dark, step by step without needing to look, suddenly felt different beneath his feet. The familiar bottom replaced by something softer, something less certain, something that did not behave the way the bottom of this ford was supposed to behave. He stopped. In the middle of the ford, water at his waist, cattle pressing around him, the northern bank behind him and the southern bank ahead. He stopped. And he remembered the coin. The accounts differ on what he did next. Some say he reached into his pocket and dropped the coin then and there, in the middle of the crossing, speaking the words his mother had taught him, even though the proper ritual was supposed to happen at the bank before the crossing began. Some say he completed the crossing without the coin, made it to the southern bank, and performed the offering there retroactively, inadequately, in the way of someone who understands that they have made an error and is trying to correct it after the fact. What the accounts agree on is that the river accepted the offering, that the bottom became firm again under his feet, that the water dropped back to its normal level at the ford, that the crossing was completed without the violent consequence that the drowning accounts describe. But they also agree on this. He was never the same in the water after that day. The ease that he had previously felt in the Limpopo, the comfort of a person who had grown up beside this river and knew it as something familiar and manageable, was gone. The river had shown him something he had not seen before, and the seeing of it changed what the crossing meant. Changed it from a routine physical task into something that required full attention, full intention, full acknowledgement of what the water was and what the crossing demanded. Some accounts suggest this was not a punishment, but a gift, the specific gift of understanding, the transformation of a young person who crossed a river without thinking into an adult who crossed with full awareness of what they were doing and what they owed. The silver coin, dropped belatedly into brown water, by not just safe passage, but the specific knowledge that made future crossings genuinely safe. The third category of Limpopo accounts is the most recent, and in some ways the most significant for tonight's story. The account of outsiders, of people who came to Limpopo without the cultural background that would have given them the protocols of the crossing, without the grandmother's instruction or the elder's guidance or the local knowledge that would have told them about the silver coin before they stepped into the water. These accounts matter because they remove one of the most common alternative explanations for the Limpopo crossing accounts. The explanation that attributes a pattern of accidents and strange experiences to the psychological effects of belief, to the specific way that people who have been told that the river is dangerous and spiritually charged approach the crossing with a fear and a heightened sensitivity that produces the specific experiences they then attribute to the river's spiritual force. The outsider who knows nothing of the silver coin, who approaches a Limpopo with the casual confidence of someone encountering an unfamiliar river for the first time, who has no culturally conditioned fear of spiritual consequences. This person, if they experience nothing unusual, is evidence against the spiritual explanation. And if they experience something unusual, if they encounter the specific anomalies that the local accounts describe, without any prior expectation that such anomalies were possible, they are a different kind of evidence. The accounts of outsiders who have crossed the Limpopo, researchers, wildlife workers, journalists, tourists, the various categories of people who have encountered the river in the context of the region's contemporary life rather than its traditional cultural framework, include enough specific anomaly accounts to be worth taking seriously, not the majority of outsider crossings. Most people who cross the Limpopo without the silver coin offering do not experience anything that they cannot explain in purely physical terms, and this needs to be acknowledged honestly. But a specific subset, people who were in the right place at the right time, in the right conditions of the river's mood, describe experiences at specific Limpopo crossings that they find genuinely difficult to account for in the terms they normally use to explain their experience of the world. The water that rose around them without any upstream cause. The current that pulled in a direction inconsistent with the river's normal flow. The specific, localized drop in temperature at a specific point in the crossing. Not the general coolness of the river water, but a specific, intense, localized cold that one person described as feeling like something reaching for them from below. These accounts do not prove the spiritual explanation, but they complicate the purely psychological one. And their existence, their persistence in the record across different types of people with different cultural backgrounds and different prior expectations, is the kind of evidence that honest engagement with the Limpopo tradition requires taking into account. The night is deep around you now, and the brown water of the Limpopo is moving in your imagination. Its opacity, concealing whatever moves beneath, its specific spiritual weight fell in the accounts of the people who have crossed it without the coin and encountered what the river does when the toll is not paid. The accounts are settling into you, the drowned, the marked, the outsiders who encountered something they could not explain. And the pattern they form together is becoming clearer, more specific, more real than the general warning of the opening could convey. This is not a river that punishes arbitrarily. This is a river with a specific logic, a logic that has been documented across generations, across communities, across different types of people with different cultural backgrounds, a logic that the silver coin addresses and that the absence of the silver coin violates. There are more accounts ahead. The guides who have watched the water change, the healers who have treated the marked ones, the specific ritual of the crossing itself, what it looks like, what is said, what the coins falling into the brown water sounds like and means. All of it is waiting, patient, and specific. On the other side of this quiet, rest here for a moment. Let the river sound be in the background of the night, low and steady and brown and deep, and let the story carry you forward when you are ready. Chapter 3. The Guides Who Know the River's Mood. There is a specific kind of knowledge that cannot be learned from books, cannot be acquired through research, cannot be assembled from the accounts of other people, cannot be constructed from the outside through any combination of intelligence and effort and genuine commitment to understanding. It can only be lived, the knowledge that the guides of the Limpopo carry, the men and women who have spent their lives beside this river, who have crossed it in every season and every condition, who have watched it in its calm periods and its violent ones, who have stood at its banks in the early morning and the late evening and the specific deep night hours when the river's spiritual character is most immediately present. This knowledge is of exactly this kind. It is lived knowledge, accumulated through years of direct exposure to the specific reality of the Limpopo, its moods, its patterns, its specific responses to the specific conditions of weather and season and human behavior that determine what the river does on any given day and at any given crossing point. And the specific piece of this knowledge that the guides are most consistent about, the observation that appears in account after account, from guide after guide, across different sections of the river in different periods of time, is this. The Limpopo knows when the offering has not been made. And when it knows, something changes in the water. Sifo has been guiding crossings at a specific ford on the Limpopo for more than 20 years. He is not a man given to exaggeration. The people who have worked with him describe him as careful, precise, the kind of person whose assessments of the river's condition are reliable precisely because they are conservative, because he does not call something dangerous unless it is genuinely dangerous. Because his judgment has been tested against the reality of the water often enough that the people who depend on his knowledge have learned to trust it without reservation. He has watched the river take people. Not many. In 20 years of guiding, the crossings he has overseen have been overwhelmingly uneventful. The careful preparation and the consistent application of the offering ritual producing the safe passage that the ritual is designed to produce. But not none. He has watched the water change around people who cross without the coin, in conditions that his experience of the river told him should have been safe. Water levels that were manageable, current speeds that were within the normal range. Nothing in the physical parameters of the crossing that would have predicted what happened. And what he describes when he talks about these moments is not the dramatic, sudden violence of a flash flood or hydraulic anomaly, not the kind of event that has an obvious physical explanation, that fits cleanly into the framework of a dangerous river doing dangerous things. He describes something more subtle, and in its subtlety, more unsettling. A thickening of the water around the person who is not paid, not a physical thickening, not a change in the water's viscosity that could be measured or recorded, but a quality of resistance, a specific sense that the water is not simply flowing around the person but pressing against them, that the normal relationship between a human body moving through water has been altered in a way that is not accounted for by the physics of the crossing. The person slows, not because a current is faster than expected, not because the bottom has become more treacherous, not because of any of the specific physical causes that slow people in river crossings, but in the specific way of something being held, something being grasped by a force that is operating through the medium of the water rather than through any of the ordinary mechanisms of hydraulics. And in that slowing, in that specific, anomalous resistance, the guide sees a moment when the crossing has moved from the physical domain into the spiritual one, when the unpaid toll has become an active claim rather than a passive absence. He has seen people make it through this moment, has seen people reach into their pockets in the middle of the crossing, having been warned, having been given the coin but failing to drop it at the bank in the proper way, and drop the coin there, in the middle of the ford, speaking whatever words they know in whatever language they have, and felt the water change again, the resistance ease, the thickening resolve into the normal flow of the river as the offering was accepted even in its imperfect, mid-crossing form. And he has seen people not make it through this moment. He does not describe these cases in detail. There is a specific reticence among the Limpopo guides when it comes to the accounts of the people the river has taken, a respect for the dead and for the specific gravity of what happened that makes elaborate description feel inappropriate. But he confirms a pattern. The people the river took were the people who crossed without the offering, in the specific conditions of the river's attentiveness, the specific times and the specific places where the spiritual forces of the Limpopo are most immediately present and most immediately responsive to the presence of people in their domain. Not every unpaid crossing results in taking. This is important to acknowledge, because it is what the guides themselves acknowledge, because the honest account of the Limpopo tradition requires the same honesty about the cases where the toll was not paid and nothing happened as it requires about the cases where it was not paid and something did. The river is not a mechanism, not a simple cause and effect system where the absence of the coin produces the same result every time regardless of any other variable. It is a presence, a living spiritual entity with its own attention and its own focus and its own specific engagement with the human beings who enter its domain, an entity that is more active in some conditions than others, more immediately present at some times in some places than others. The guide's knowledge is, in large part, the knowledge of when those conditions are in effect, the ability to read the river's mood in the specific way that long experience produces, to know when the crossing requires more than the usual care, when the spiritual attentiveness of the Limpopo is at its highest and the consequences of the unpaid toll are most immediate. Mima Thandi has been a traditional healer in a community on the southern bank of the Limpopo for more than 30 years. Her specific area of expertise, the thing that people come to her for from communities far beyond her immediate neighborhood, is a treatment of the specific condition that the Limpopo produces in those it marks, the illness that does not respond to ordinary treatment because its origin is not ordinary. She has treated dozens of these cases over the course of her career. She describes them with a clinical precision that is at odds with the popular image of traditional healing as a vague, impressionistic practice. She has specific diagnostic criteria for the Limpopo Ma condition, specific physical and behavioral signs that she looks for, specific questions she asks about the history of the patient's recent crossings and the specific details of those crossings, the presence or absence of the offering, the specific crossing point, the time of day, the season, of the year. Her diagnostic process is, in its own terms, as rigorous as any other form of clinical assessment, organized around specific criteria, applied consistently, producing specific conclusions that guide specific treatments. The physical presentation of the Limpopo Ma condition, as she describes it, includes a specific pattern of symptoms that she has learned to recognize across the many cases she has treated. A persistent fatigue that is different from ordinary tiredness, not the fatigue of physical exertion or illness, but the specific depletion of someone whose energy is being drawn upon by a force outside themselves, the specific quality of tiredness that comes from an ongoing spiritual claim rather than from the ordinary demands of a physically demanding life, a specific relationship with water, a heightened sensitivity to the proximity of water, a discomfort near rivers and pools that the person did not have before the uncompleted crossing, a specific quality of fear or unease near water that the community recognizes as a signature of the Limpopo's mark. Dreams, specific, recurring, vivid dreams that center on water, on crossing, on the specific experience of being in the Limpopo and feeling the resistance that the guides describe, the thickening of the water around a body that has not paid its toll. These dreams are not simply the psychological processing of a frightening experience. They are understood in the Venda tradition as a specific communication of the river's spiritual force, the ongoing attempt of the Limpopo to make the unpaid debt visible to the person who owes it, to call their attention to the specific obligation that needs to be discharged before the connection between them and the river can be properly resolved. Mama Thandi's treatment of these cases always begins with a return to the river. Not immediately, not before the person is strong enough to make the journey, not before the specific preparatory work that the return crossing requires has been done, but always, eventually, the return. The person who was marked by the Limpopo must go back to the crossing point where the unpaid toll occurred, specifically that crossing point, not another section of the river, not a symbolic gesture made at a distance, and must perform the offering with a specific fullness and a specific intentionality that the original crossing lacked. The coin, silver, always silver, dropped into the water at the specific place where the debt was incurred. The word spoken, the specific acknowledgement of what was done and what was owed, the specific request of forgiveness from the spiritual forces of the river, the specific expression of understanding of the Limpopo's nature and authority that the original crossing failed to express. And then the crossing, made fully, completely, with a coin paid and the words spoken and the attention given that the river requires, demonstrating through the act of the correct crossing that the person has learned what the marking was intended to teach. The resolution of the symptoms, the lifting of the fatigue, the easing of the water sensitivity, the change in the character of the dreams, typically follows a return crossing within a period of days to weeks in the accounts that Mama Thandi gives of her successfully treated cases. Not always immediately, the river's release, like the river's claim, operates on its own timeline rather than on the timeline of human urgency. But consistently, the return crossing, performed correctly, with the full attention and the full offering that the Limpopo requires, resolves the condition that the incomplete crossing created. The debt is paid. The mark is released. The person can go near water again without the specific unease of the marked, can cross the Limpopo again with the ease of someone who has learned the correct protocol and who performs it not as an obligation but as a genuine acknowledgement of what the river is. The guides who know the Limpopo best are unanimous on one point. The river's mood is not constant, and the ability to read that mood is a most essential skill in their practice. There are times when the Limpopo is quiet, When the spiritual forces that animate it are, in the guide's experience, less immediately present, less actively engaged with the human beings who enter the domain, more tolerant of the small imperfections and the small inattentions that every crossing inevitably contains. And there are times when the Limpopo is awake. The guides describe these times in consistent terms across different communities in different sections of the river. Times when the water has a specific quality of attention, when something in the way the light falls on it, or the way the sound of it changes, or the specific feeling of the air at the bank communicates to the experienced observer that the river is fully present, fully engaged, fully attentive to what is happening at its crossing points. These are the times when the offering is most critical. When an incomplete offering, a coin dropped perfunctorily, without the words, without the genuine acknowledgement, is less likely to satisfy the river's requirements and complete one would be. When the specific quality of attention that the crossing demands is highest, and the consequences of inattention are most immediate. The guides learn to read these times through experience, through the accumulated sensitivity of years of exposure to the river's character, the development of an intuition that is not magical but is genuinely difficult to articulate in terms that would make it teachable to someone who has not spent the same years in the same relationship with the same river. Chapter 4. The Ritual Itself. There is a moment, just before the coin leaves a hand, when everything stops. Not literally. The river keeps moving. The wind keeps its conversation with the tall grass along the bank. The birds that live in the riverine forest continue their specific calls and responses in the canopy above. But for the person standing at the bank with a silver coin in their palm, something stops. The internal noise of ordinary life, the running commentary of thoughts and plans and memories and worries that fills the mind during every waking hour, goes quiet. Not because it has been silenced by effort, not through any act of conscious mental discipline, but because the specific quality of attention that the ritual demands naturally produces is quieting, the same way that any genuine encounter with something larger than the self produces it. The river is in front of you, the coin is in your hand, and for just this moment, before the coin leaves your fingers and the crossing begins, you are completely here, completely present in this specific place, at this specific body of water, in this specific relationship with a force that is older than any word you have for it and more real than any explanation you have been given for it. This moment of presence is not incidental to the ritual. It is the ritual. The specific form of the Limpopo crossing ritual varies across the different communities along the river's length, varies in the specific words used, in the specific gestures that accompany the offering, in the specific prayers or invocations that different traditions associate with the crossing, in the specific understanding of who or what the offering is being made to. What is consistent, what appears in every version of the ritual across every community that practices it, is the structure of genuine acknowledgement. The person crossing acknowledges the river, not as a physical object to be negotiated, not as a collection of water and silt and current and underwater geography to be assessed and crossed, but as a presence, a living entity with its own authority and its own requirements, an entity whose domain is being entered and whose permission for that entry is being formally requested. The acknowledgement has specific components that the ritual enacts in specific sequence, a sequence that the guides and the elders describe consistently when they explain what the crossing requires. The approach to the bank is the first component, not the casual, distracted approach of a person focused on their destination rather than on their crossing, but the specific, deliberate approach of someone who is aware that they are moving toward a threshold, that the ground under their feet is becoming sacred ground as they near the water, that the quality of attention they bring to the crossing begins before they reach the bank. Experienced crossers describe a specific change in how they walk as they near the Limpopo, a slowing, a settling, a shift from the purposeful forward momentum of ordinary travel to the specific attentiveness of someone entering a space that requires a different quality of presence. The body knows before the mind articulates it. The specific quality of the air near the river, the specific sound of the water, the specific smell of the brown Limpopo water that is unlike the smell of any other water in the region. These sensory signals communicate to the experienced crosser that they have entered the river's domain before they have technically reached the bank. The stopping is the second component. At the bank, at the specific point where the land meets the water, where the firm ground under the feet gives way to the uncertain footing of the river crossing, the experienced crosser stops. Not pauses, not a brief moment of hesitation before continuing, but genuinely stops, stands still, and takes a full measure of what is in front of them. The water, its level at the specific crossing point today, higher or lower than the last crossing, carrying more or less silt, moving faster or slower, showing the specific surface patterns of the experience I read as indicators of the current speed and the bottom conditions below. The sky above the river, the quality of the light, the presence or absence of clouds that might indicate changing conditions upstream, the specific atmosphere of the day that the guides learn to read as part of their assessment of the river's mood. And beneath the physical assessment, beneath the practical evaluation of the crossing conditions that good sense requires of anyone entering a river, the specific, less articulable quality of attention that the experienced crosser gives to the spiritual dimension of what they are facing. The river's mood, its specific attentiveness on this day, at this crossing point, in these conditions, the intuitive assessment that the guides describe as their most essential skill, the reading of the water that tells them whether the Limpopo is quiet today or awake, whether the offering will be received with the river's ordinary acceptance or in the specific conditions of its full spiritual attention. This assessment cannot be rushed. The guides and the elders who teach the crossing ritual are explicit about this. The stopping at a bank is not a formality, not a gesture in the direction of the ritual that can be discharged in a few seconds before getting on with the practical business of the crossing. It is a genuine pause, long enough for the river to be seen, really seen, with the full attention of a person who is present rather than distracted, and for the specific quality of its presence on this day to be felt rather than simply observed. Some crossings require a long pause. Some experienced crossers describe standing at a bank for 10 or 15 minutes before they feel ready to begin the offering, before the specific quality of attention that the ritual requires has fully assembled itself, before the internal noise of ordinary life is quieted enough for the river's presence to be genuinely felt rather than simply acknowledged in principle. This is not unusual. This is a ritual working as it is supposed to work. The words are the third component, and they are the most variable element across the different communities and the different individuals who practice the crossing ritual. There is no single prayer, no single formula, no single specific combination of words that every crossing requires. The oral traditions of the Limpopo communities are consistent about the structure of the acknowledgement that the words must express, but they allow significant variation in the specific language through which that acknowledgement is made. What the words must say, regardless of the specific language used, regardless of the specific tradition within which the crossing is being made, is this: I see you. I know what you are. I know that this water is not mine, that the crossing I am about to make is a passage through your domain rather than a right I possess by virtue of my own strength or my own knowledge or my own will. I ask your permission. I offer this silver in acknowledgement of your authority and in recognition of the toll that the crossing requires. I ask for safe passage, for myself and for those crossing with me, and I commit to the respect for your domain that this crossing demands. These are not the specific words. They are the specific meaning that the specific words, in whatever language and whatever formulation the crossing tradition requires, must carry. The guides and the elders who teach the ritual are clear that the words said without the meaning are insufficient, that the formula spoken by rote, without the genuine internal acknowledgement that gives the words their substance, does not satisfy the ritual requirement in the way that the same words spoken with genuine attention and genuine acknowledgement do. The river, in the understanding of the crossing tradition, is not fooled by the form without the substance. It receives the offering when the offering is genuine. It is not satisfied by the performance of an offering that is not internally real. The coin is a fourth component, and it is the most physically specific, the element of the ritual that is most precisely defined and least variable across the different versions of the crossing tradition. Silver, always silver, not any silver, not a silver ring or a silver button or any other object that happens to be made of the same metal, but a silver coin, specifically the circular form and the specific cultural weight of currency chosen, because a coin is the most universally recognized physical expression of value, the most immediately legible statement that what is being offered is something of genuine worth rather than a token gesture. The specific denomination of the silver coin, the specific country and the specific value stamped on its face, is less important than the metal itself, according to the guides and the elders who teach the ritual. What matters is that it is silver. What matters is that it is a coin, a recognized unit of value, offered freely. The specific willingness to give something of genuine worth is the expression of genuine respect. The coin is held in the right hand, or in both hands, in some versions of the ritual, during the words, so that the warmth of the body passes into the metal during the acknowledgement, connecting the specific human presence of the crosser to the specific physical object that will represent that presence in the river. This warming of the coin in the hand is not a trivial detail. It is a specific act of making the offering personal, of ensuring that what enters the water is not simply a piece of metal, but a piece of metal that carries the specific warmth and the specific presence of the person offering it. That the river receives not just silver in the abstract, but something that has been in genuine contact with a specific human being requesting passage. The coin dropped from a pocket, cold, untouched, offered as an afterthought rather than a genuine acknowledgement, is not the same as a coin warmed in the hand during the words, offered as a physical expression of the genuine internal acknowledgement that the ritual requires. The guides are consistent about this. The warmth matters. The drop is a moment that everything has been building toward. The specific instant when the coin leaves the hand and enters the water, when the offering passes from the human domain into the river's domain, when the transaction of the ritual enacts is completed. People who have performed this ritual correctly, who have made the approach with the right attention, and stopped at the bank with genuine presence, and spoken the words with genuine meaning, and warmed the coin in their hands during the acknowledgement, describe the drop in terms that go beyond the simple physical action of releasing an object into water. They describe a feeling, a specific, physical, immediately felt sensation at the moment the coin hits the surface and disappears into the brown water, a sensation that different people describe in different terms, but that clusters around consistent core experience. A release, a lightening, the specific feeling of something that was being held, not consciously, not effortfully, but held nonetheless, being released at the moment the coin enters the water, as if the river, in receiving the offering, simultaneously received whatever tension the approach and the stopping and the words have been building in the body, and releases it along with the acceptance of the offering. Some people describe this as a warmth entering the chest. Some describe it as a brief loosening of the shoulders, the specific physical expression of a tension that was present without being noticed until its release made it retrospectively visible. Some describe something more unusual, a specific, brief quality of connection, a moment in which the barrier between the individual self and the river seems momentarily thinner, in which the brown water in front of them seems for just an instant to be something they are part of rather than something they are facing. These descriptions are not consistent enough to build a single account from. They are individual experiences, varied in their specific character, united by the consistent sense of the drop of the coin as a moment of genuine spiritual transaction rather than simply a physical action. The river receives something, and the crosser feels a receiving. The crossing that follows the offering is different from the crossing that precedes it. Different not in its physical parameters, not in the water level or the current speed or the specific bottom conditions of the ford, but in the quality of the crosser's experience of it. This difference is described consistently by experienced crossers across different communities in different sections of the Limpopo. The specific quality of ease that the paid crossing has, the sense of moving through the water with the water's cooperation rather than against its indifference, the feeling that the brown water is neither hostile nor neutral but actively engaged in the passage of the person who has acknowledged its authority. The guides describe watching this quality of crossing from the bank. The specific way that experienced crossers who have paid the toll move through the water differently from people who have not. The ease of movement that is not simply the product of skill or confidence, but of something more specific. The quality of someone who is in right relationship with the water they are moving through. This ease is not absolute. The Limpopo remains a physically demanding crossing even when the offering has been made. The current and the bottom conditions and the specific hazards of any river crossing are still present and still require attention and skill to navigate safely. But within the physical demands of the crossing, there is a quality of ease that the offering produces, quality that the people who cross the Limpopo regularly recognize as a specific experience of moving through water that has accepted you, that has received your acknowledgement and granted the passage you requested. This is what the silver coin buys, not a guarantee. The river makes no promises, and the guides are honest about this, but a relationship, a specific quality of relationship between the crosser and the river, the relationship of guest and host, of someone who has acknowledged the authority of a domain and been received into it rather than simply entering it by right of their own physical capability. The crossing made in this relationship is different from the crossing made without it, not always dramatically different, not always in ways that an outside observer would notice from the bank, but felt from the inside as a specific difference between moving through water that is with you and moving through water that is simply there. The ritual of the Limpopo crossing, understood in its full depth, is not simply a transaction, not simply the payment of toll to a spiritual entity in exchange for safe passage in the way that one might pay a toll at a gate for the right to use a road. It is a practice of relationship, a specific, enacted, physically grounded practice of maintaining a relationship with a force that the crossing tradition understands as genuinely real, genuinely powerful, and genuinely responsive to the quality of acknowledgement it receives from the human beings who enter its domain. The silver coin is a physical expression of this acknowledgement, the specific, materially real gesture through which the internal recognition of the river's authority is made external, made visible, made concrete in a specific way that the river can receive. And the consistency of the account, the specific, repeated, cross-culturally documented reality of what happens when the acknowledgement is given and what happens when it is not, is the specific evidence that the relationship being maintained is not simply a psychological construction, but something that corresponds to a genuine feature of the reality that the Limpopo embodies. The river is real. Its requirement is real. The silver coin is real. And the crossing, made with genuine acknowledgement, with the warmth of the hand in the metal and the meaning in the words and the genuine presence of the bank, is the most real thing of all. The night has moved deep now, and the ritual is inside you. The approach and the stopping and the words and the warming and the drop and the crossing, the full sequence of the specific practice that has kept people safe on the Limpopo for longer than anyone can measure. You have been at the bank tonight, in the way that stories can place you at a bank without moving your body from where it rests. And you have felt something of what the ritual feels like, the specific quality of presence it requires, and the specific quality of ease it produces. There is one more chapter ahead, the deepest one, the one that asks what the silver coin offering is really about, beyond the specific spiritual mechanics of the specific river, at the level of what it says about the relationship between human beings and the natural world and the forces that animate it. That chapter is the one that tonight has been building toward from the very first word. And it is waiting for you now, on the other side of the stillness. Let the river be in the background of the night, low and brown and patient. carrying its silt toward the sea, carrying its secrets in the opacity of its brown water, carrying, somewhere in its current, the silver coins of 1,000 crossings, each one the specific, physical, materially real expression of a genuine acknowledgement, a genuine relationship, a genuine recognition of what the water is and what it deserves. Chapter 5. What the river is really asking for. Strip everything away. Strip away the specific spiritual mechanics of the Limpopo crossing tradition, the specific deities and the specific coins and the specific words and the specific sequence of the ritual that we have been examining in detail through preceding chapters of tonight's story. Strip away the accounts of the drowned and the mocked and the outsiders who encountered something they could not explain. Strip away the guide's testimony and the healer's diagnostic criteria and the specific ethnographic record of what the communities along the river have observed and documented and transmitted across generations. Strip all of it away and ask the most basic possible question about what remains. What is the Limpopo crossing ritual actually about? Not in the specific terms of the Venda spiritual tradition, not in the language of the specific deities and the specific spiritual mechanics that the tradition uses to describe and explain the practice, but at the level beneath all of that, the level of the fundamental human experience that the tradition is organized around, the specific quality of relationship between a human being and the natural world that the silver coin enacts. What is it really asking for? The answer, when you follow the evidence honestly and completely to where it leads, is both simpler and more profound than any of the specific spiritual mechanics would suggest. The Limpopo is asking for attention, real attention, the specific, full, genuine quality of human awareness that recognizes that the world contains forces larger than the self, forces that are not simply obstacles to be navigated or resources to be exploited or backgrounds against which the drama of human life is enacted, but genuine presences, genuine entities, genuine aspects of a reality that is larger and more complex and more spiritually alive than the human tendency to place the self at the center of the world tends to acknowledge. There's a way of moving through the natural world that treats it as a note, as simply there, the specific collection of physical features and physical forces that form the environment within which human life is conducted, real in the sense that they affect us and can harm us if we are careless, but not real in the sense of having their own interiority, their own specific presence, their own claim on our attention and our respect beyond the purely practical claim of a dangerous physical environment. This way of moving through the natural world is, in the modern industrial world, the default, the assumed framework within which most people in most contemporary societies relate to the rivers and the forests and the mountains and the oceans that form the natural context of their lives. The river is water, current, depth, a physical system to be assessed and managed, a resource to be used or a hazard to be avoided, real in all the ways that matter for practical navigation, but not real in the way of an entity that has its own relationship to the human beings who enter it, that registers the quality of their approach, that responds differently to genuine acknowledgement than to distracted utility. The Limpopo crossing tradition is a direct challenge to this framework, not a theoretical challenge, not a philosophical argument against the innate nature model, but a practical one, grounded in the specific, documented, repeatedly confirmed experience of what happens when the river is treated as a note and what happens when it is treated as alive. The silver coin is a physical expression of the alternative framework, the specific, enacted, materially real gesture that says a river is not simply water and current and depth, that the crossing is not simply a physical transaction between a human body and a fluid medium, that something is owed to the specific presence of the specific body of water that goes beyond the purely practical debt of gratitude for safe passage. The river is alive. The crossing requires acknowledgement to that aliveness. The silver coin is the acknowledgement, the specific choice of a coin, of currency, of the most universally recognized physical expression of human economic value. As a material, the offering is not arbitrary, And at this deepest level of the tradition's meaning, it reveals something that the more surface-level interpretations of the practice tend to miss. A coin is a thing that human beings use to conduct transactions with each other, to acknowledge value, to discharge obligations, to maintain the specific economic relationships that organized human society depends on. By dropping a coin into the river, by using a specific instrument of human economic exchange as a medium of the offering, the tradition is making a specific claim about the nature of the relationship between human beings and the river. The relationship is one of mutual obligation, not a relationship in which the human being is simply a user of a resource and the river is simply the resource being used, not the relationship of a customer to a product, or of an agent to an instrument, or of a subject to an environment. A relationship of mutual obligation, in which the human being owes something to the river and acknowledges that debt in the specific way that human beings are developed for acknowledging debts to each other, through the physical exchange of recognized value. The coin dropped into the Limpopo is a payment of a debt that the crossing tradition understands as genuinely owed, not as a superstition, not as a culturally constructed fiction, but as a specific expression of a genuine ethical reality about the relationship between human beings and the natural world. We owe the river something, not because it is threatening or because we fear its power, though both of these things are real, but because it gives us something, because the crossing of its waters is a genuine benefit that the river's existence makes possible, because the relationship between human life and the water that sustains it is a relationship of genuine dependency that deserves genuine acknowledgement. The silver coin is that acknowledgement, made specific, made material, made real in the way that acknowledgement needs to be real to have the quality of genuine respect rather than simply intellectual assent. There is a broader tradition of which the Limpopo crossing ritual is one specific expression, a tradition that appears in different forms across many different African cultures and many different indigenous cultures around the world, a tradition that has been described in the academic literature under various names but that shares a consistent underlying structure. The tradition of relationship with the natural world, the specific understanding, enacted through specific rituals and specific practices and specific protocols for interacting with specific features of the natural environment. That the world is not simply the stage on which human life is performed, but a community of presences that human beings are embedded in and dependent on and ethically related to. A community that makes claims on human attention and human respect that go beyond the purely practical claims of a dangerous physical environment. This tradition is not unique to Southern Africa. It appears in the specific river rituals of West African communities, in the specific mountain protocols of East African pastoral peoples, in the specific forest practices of Central African hunter-gatherers, in the specific ocean traditions of the Swahili Coast sailors whose story we told in an earlier episode of this channel. It appears, in different forms, in the indigenous traditions of the Americas and the Pacific and Asia and everywhere else that human beings have lived in long-term relationship with specific natural environments and developed a specific accumulated understanding of those environments that generates genuine respect rather than simple exploitation. This tradition is not primitive. It is not the product of ignorance about how the natural world actually works, not the result of a failure to understand the physical mechanisms of rivers and mountains and forests in the way that modern science understands them. It is a product of a different kind of knowledge, the specific, accumulated, experientially grounded knowledge of people who have lived in close relationship with specific natural environments for long enough to understand them in ways that purely external, analytical observation cannot produce. The knowledge that the river is alive, not metaphorically, not as a useful fiction that produces respectful behavior toward a physical system that benefits from respectful treatment, actually alive, in the specific sense of being a genuine presence in the world, having a character, having moods, having a specific relationship to the human beings who enter its domain that is responsive to the quality of attention and acknowledgement they bring. What the Limpopo crossing tradition offers to the person who engages with it honestly, who approaches it not as an anthropological curiosity or a cultural artifact to be observed from the outside, but as a genuine practice to be understood from the inside, is an invitation. An invitation to a different quality of relationship with the natural world, not the relationship of someone moving through an inert environment, assessing physical hazards, managing practical risks, extracting resources, treating the non-human world as a background of the genuinely important human story, but the relationship of someone who understands that the human story is embedded in a larger story, that the river and the forest and the mountain and the ocean are not backgrounds but participants, not inert features but genuine presences, not simply there for human use but existing in their own right with their own specific authority over the domains that are theirs. The silver coin is the entry point into this relationship, the specific, physical, materially real gesture through which the internal recognition of the river's aliveness is enacted in the world, made concrete, made communicable, made real in the way that internal states need to be made real to have the quality of genuine relationship rather than simply private experience. The crossing made after the coin is dropped is a relationship, the specific, enacted experience of moving through a world that is genuinely alive and genuinely responsive, of being in the brown water of the Limpopo as someone who has acknowledged what it is and who is therefore in it differently than someone who is not. This is what the ritual is really asking for. Not the coin. The coin is a vehicle, the specific physical expression of something more fundamental. The attention, the genuine, full, embodied attention of a human being who has stopped at the bank and really looked at the water in front of them and felt the specific weight of what it is, the living presence of body of water that has been flowing through this landscape for millions of years, carrying its silt toward the sea, receiving the offerings of the communities along its banks, giving passage to those who acknowledge its authority, and collecting its toll from those who do not. The river is asking to be seen, not assessed, not managed, not exploited or negotiated with or reduced to the sum of its physical parameters. Seen, in the full sense of genuine attention, the kind of seeing that changes the one who sees as much as it acknowledges what is seen. The kind of seeing that the silver coin, warmed in the hand and dropped into the brown water with genuine acknowledgement, is a physical expression of. This is why the ritual has survived. Not because the communities along the Limpopo have been too isolated or too traditional to abandon practices that modern understanding has superseded, but because the ritual continues to do what it has always done, to produce a specific quality of relationship between human beings and the river that the practice is designed to produce, to generate the specific experience of genuine acknowledgement and genuine response that the accounts of the guides and the healers and the ordinary people who cross the Limpopo regularly continue to report. The ritual survives because it works, not always in the dramatic ways, not always with the immediate, visible, undeniable manifestation of spiritual consequence that the most striking accounts describe, but consistently, in the ordinary way of a practice that produces a genuine quality of relationship, the ease of the paid crossing, the specific quality of moving through water that has accepted you, the particular piece of a person who has acknowledged what they owe and paid it. This is ordinary enough to be available to anyone who approaches a Limpopo with the genuine attention the ritual requires, and extraordinary enough to be the thing that the communities along the river have chosen, across generations of accumulated experience, to preserve and to transmit and to insist upon, even in the face of modernity, even in the face of the various pressures that have eroded so many other aspects of the traditional knowledge of the region. The silver coin offering at the Limpopo crossing has survived because the Limpopo has continued to demonstrate, in the specific and sometimes violent ways that the accounts of tonight's story have described, that the survival of the practice is justified, that the river is real, that the requirement is real, that the silver coin, dropped with genuine attention into the brown water of one of the most spiritually charged rivers in southern Africa, is a specific, irreplaceable, non-negotiable expression of the respect that the crossing requires. The night is complete around you now, not the artificial completeness of a story that has reached its final page and closed, but the natural completeness of something that has found its way to the place it was always heading, that has followed its own logic from the opening question to the answer that the question was always pointing toward. Is your life worth more than a single piece of silver? You know the answer now. Know it not just as a piece of information, but as something felt, something that has settled into the specific part of you where the things that genuinely matter live. Your life is not worth more than a single piece of silver, in the sense that the question is actually asking, not because silver is more valuable than life, but because a silver coin is not really about its material value, not really about the exchange of one thing for another in the economic sense. It is about recognition, about the specific willingness to stop at the bank, in the middle of the crossing, in whatever moment the river's reality makes itself felt, and to recognize that the world you are moving through is not simply the backdrop of your own story, but a community of presences that you are embedded in, that you depend on, that make claims on your attention and your respect that are as real as any claim that any person makes on any other. The silver coin is the recognition made material, the recognition made real in the specific way that the Limpopo, brown, opaque, silt-laden, patient, powerful, alive in the specific way of a body of water that has been receiving offerings and granting passage and collecting its toll for longer than any human memory reaches, requires it to be real, not in your head, in your hand, warm from your skin, falling into the brown water with the specific sound of something valuable being genuinely given, not spent, not lost, not sacrificed, given to a river that receives it, and grant you passage through a world that was never simply yours to cross. Feel the weight of your body now, the full, complete, comfortable heaviness of a body that has been carried by a story for a long time and is ready, in the deepest sense, to rest. Not the restlessness of someone who has been entertained and is now simply done, but the specific settled quality of someone who has been somewhere real tonight, who has stood at the bank of the Limpopo in the way that stories can take you to banks without moving your body, who has felt something of what the silver coin feels like in a hand, and what the drop sounds like, and what the brown water looks like as it receives the offering and closes over it. The river is still moving somewhere out there in the dark, carrying its brown water toward the Indian Ocean, carrying its silt through the border between the countries its length defines, carrying its secrets in the opacity that has always been its most essential character, and in its currents, somewhere, the silver coins of tonight's story are resting on the riverbed, each one the specific, physical, materially real expression of a genuine acknowledgement, a genuine relationship, a genuine recognition of what the water is. May you never cross the Limpopo without one. May you never cross any water, any river, any threshold, any boundary between the world you know and the world you are entering, without the specific quality of attention that the silver coin enacts. May you always stop at the bank. May you always warm the coin in your hand. May you always speak the words with the meaning behind them. And may the water always receive you. Good night.